Hi, this recording is going to go over Unit 7 on Geometry in the Math Plus Purple, and this is the last unit in the first semester. You can see that this unit is very short, but one thing that I do have to say about geometry is that even though it's fun and kids may remember the terms when they go through the lessons, there are so many vocabulary words that are introduced within the geometry unit that it's important to continue to play games and talk about some of these different shapes and their attributes even after the unit is finished. So what we're going to do is, first of all, just remind you that when you open up the very first lesson, there will be links to the lesson guide and the activity guide. Most of the lessons in this unit are not going to be in the student activity guide, and I'll show you that in just a second. Most lessons are going to be guided by you as the learning coach, as well as online. So if we go to the Math Plus Purple activity guide, you can see that as you go over and open up the side tab, there's the geometry tab. There's only 3 different activities in that. If you go to the Math Plus Purple lesson guide, you will see if you open up the geometry tab over on the side, there's going to be something for every single day that helps you gather materials around the house or do things on grid paper. So let me try to open that up. The computer's being a little slow this morning. But when you open up the geometry unit, you will see that there's quite an extensive list that has more things. You can also go to this resource section. In the resource section, that is where you're going to find some of the materials that it talks about, such as dot paper, and you will also find the extended reasoning section there. So let's go ahead and first of all talk a little bit about some of the things that your child will see when they go to the geometry unit. As I mentioned, there are tons of vocabulary words, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them today, but as you go through the lesson, you'll see more and more. Right here in the first activity, students are really thinking about what is a polygon, what isn't a polygon. Polygons are any shape that has closed straight sides. So anything that has a curve, like it could be a whole circle or it could just be a curved side, are not polygons. Everything has to be straight. You can't have any openings either, so it has to be a closed figure with straight sides. All of these shapes right here are polygons. And the thing that's really interesting is students may know that a quadrilateral has 4 sides. And they may know that a pentagon has 5 sides, but they may not really realize that all of these shapes, even though they don't look like the traditional quadrilateral, like a square or a rectangle, like some that have special names, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. It is still a quadrilateral. Over here for number 6, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. It's a pentagon, but it doesn't look like the special pentagon or the regular pentagon that has all sides that are exactly the same. So we do want students to understand the difference between a polygon, even though all of these names aren't needed to be memorized. I will tell you the ones that are most important, of course, would be triangle, quadrilateral, and pentagon, or in this first column, a lot of those. And when they think of hexagon, think of 6 with that X, and then an octagon is also a pretty common one. Don't worry if they don't memorize septagon and nonagon and decagon right now in 3rd grade. So I'm going to go ahead and go through this because after they practice some of the shapes and count the sides, and as you can see, some of these are more regular shapes that have the same size that are all, but then this one is an irregular shape. And let's count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. So we think about that 6-sided figure, and what would that be? Down here, as you continue to go through, it's going to say use the dot paper. As I mentioned, this is where you can go to that resource section, go to the geometry unit, go to dot paper printout, and there's 2 different ones to choose from. And I'm also going to show you where you can use some online tools that are very similar to dot paper. The next lesson is on parallelograms, and this is just one type of quadrilateral. There's also trapezoids, there's rhombus, rectangle, square. The thing that we want students to realize is that even though they're all quadrilaterals, they have different attributes. And so here it says use dot paper to draw an example of a parallelogram, a rectangle, and a square. I'm going to show you something really quickly with the document camera, because one thing that you can do is get like your dot paper, or if you want to use an online Geo Board like this, or I've even known of families that took a small piece of wood and put nails on the wood and got some rubber bands, and they made their own homemade Geo Board. But if we wanted to build a rectangle, we could do this, and we could tell the children, you know, that rectangle could also be called a parallelogram because it has two sets of parallel sides. Here we have a trapezoid. A trapezoid has one set of parallel sides, and if we kept going, those lines would eventually intersect. When I think of trapezoid, and I know a lot of times we view them a different way, but we want to show kids that we can twist them and turn them anyway, and they're still a trapezoid. I always think about, one opening's really big and something could fit in, but it gets trapped and couldn't fit out the other side because it can go in one side and not the other. So this one is definitely not a parallelogram. This one is a square and a parallelogram. And then when we make things like a parallelogram that is not a rectangle, we want to show them that there's two sets of parallel sides. So just in this one thing, we've talked about lots of vocabulary words: quadrilaterals, parallelograms, rectangles, trapezoids. Rhombus is another word. Parallel sides are another term. So there's just lots of things to practice, and as I mentioned, just doing them one day and then moving on to the next lesson is not going to probably be the best idea because there are so many vocabulary words. So we'll definitely want to review before the end of year assessments. There's even words such as opposite, and we also in the OLS, they will be covering angles, and I'll show you that in just a second as well. And so then after we go through the parallelograms, there's only one more activity that is here in the student guide, and this is the core focus, and then this is exactly the key to the entire unit because it talks about how they're alike and how they're different. They're both quadrilaterals. They both have at least one set of parallel sides. This one has two sets of parallel sides. This one has right angles. This one has acute and obtuse angles. So there's lots of things that you could talk about, but we really want students to analyze shapes, talk about how they're both alike, because they both, on a checklist, could be called a quadrilateral. So you're going to go through different things such as that, and then there's one activity which I really love, and it's this chart where it really does show that right here, all of these have four sides, and let's see what else they have in common. So we go through and really mark all the different things and compare so that we can really analyze that shapes can be called more than one thing. And this really comes into play too with the triangles. So I am going to go back to the online school just to show you a little bit about what your child will see, because in addition to the polygons and parallelograms, there is a lesson on triangles. And with the lesson on triangles, and I'm going to use my document camera again, there's going to be several different types of triangles, and just like with polygons and quadrilaterals and things, they can be called different things. One term to know is the equilateral. Let me focus that a little bit better. Equilateral triangles. So we have equilateral. I always have students really think about that first part of the word, that each side is equal. This side, and this side are all the same size. The next type of shape or triangle is an isosceles, and those two sides are the same, and isosceles starts with an I. And I hope I just spelled that correctly. But when I think of an I, I think of two sides are the same and one side is different. That is exactly what a student will see on an isosceles triangle. And then the next is a scalene. A scalene triangle has no sides that are the same. And we always want to think about maybe the scale of notes on a piano, and you go up. Every note is different, just like in a scale, and that's the same as you would see in a scalene triangle. Now the other thing that is within the triangles, because we've just classified the triangles by their sides, but you can also classify the triangles by their angles. So here's something that you could also make at home, and this is an angle identifier. You could get two pieces of cardstock and put a little brad in the middle so that this can still open and turn. You could also just get toothpicks and make angles, and you could talk about, and I don't have small marshmallows, but you could use anything, a piece of candy or anything that's sticky, and you could then have students make certain things and label them. But with this, any angle that is less than 90 degrees or that will not make that perfect square in the corner is an acute. It's little and cute, but then when we open it up and get bigger, it's obtuse. And I think of I always like to even say the word obtuse is just bigger, and then acute is smaller. So if we have, you can see this triangle is an equilateral acute triangle because all of the angles are smaller than 90 degrees. This one is an isosceles with all acute angles. This is a right scalene angle because it does have that square that makes that 90-degree angle. We could also have an obtuse scalene triangle because this one is bigger than 90 degrees. So we have acute, right, and obtuse as measuring the angles, and then equilateral, isosceles, and scalene that actually tell us about the sides and how they're all different. So triangles can be classified with two different names. So let's go ahead, and now I am going to show you a little bit of what you're going to see within the lesson guide. In the lesson guide, in addition to the worksheet pages, like I mentioned, a lot of the activities are learning coach directed. There's games to play and other activities. I'm going to, in the newsletter, show you some ways that you can enhance some of the things by doing a Geo Board, just like I have here. There's interactive Geo Board, so you don't have to print out the dot paper, and students can simply follow your directions and make a quadrilateral by moving the pieces onto the board and stretching them and seeing how many different quadrilaterals they can make. They can change the colors. You can make the board have more nails on it as you pull things on and move them. Let me see if I can get this to stay. You can see that if I pull it in the middle, when it gets green, when it's red, it's not going to work, but when it gets green, it's good to go. And so we could even have our students make a irregular quadrilateral, a regular one, just see how many different ones they can make, and then compare them with the attributes and their sides and their angles, because just like triangles, rectangles and squares and all the different polygons that we've already talked about, all of them, including triangles, have angles and sides that help us classify them. There's also some activities that I will include in the newsletter. This is a shape sorter, and your child, and you can make a Venn diagram and use this as instructions. So you pick one attribute on this side and one attribute on this side, and there's a whole list to choose from. So you can focus on things that are in the angles and things that have sides. There's also some new vocabulary that you don't have to include, but you can choose. There's things that have symmetry and all sorts of things. So then, as you select your two attributes, the ones on this side have at least one right angle. The ones on this side has more than 4 sides, so I have angles and sides. And then the ones in the middle have at least one right angle and more than 4 sides. So they have attributes of both. So this is just a fun activity, and you can change it up by picking the different attributes that you like. I'm also going to send links to this activity because this is just a fun game that you can play at home, and it does have the shape cards that you can print out. Of course, one of my favorite all-time sites is LearnZillion. And if you go to LearnZillion and you go to the Common Core Navigator tab, and I know it's been a little slow opening here, but if you go to the Common Core Navigator tab right here, and you go to the geometry section for 3rd grade, there are tons of videos, and it talks about all of the things that we've just gone over about parallel sides and non-parallel sides and special quadrilaterals, and there's also videos on triangles, and so there's more than one set, and it says how can we group these, and it talks about how we can group them especially when some may have the same attributes. So I'll see if this will open up for me. If we go to the Common Core Navigator tab, and then we'll just select 3rd grade, and from there we are going to select geometry, and geometry is right here, and there are 2 different folders. This first one, or 2 different standards. This first one has 2 different folders, and this is talking about different shape attributes, and this one is more into dividing shapes into equal areas, which this unit doesn't cover, but it doesn't hurt to preview that a little bit to get ready. So it's this first 3GA.1, and both of these folders would be really helpful resources. You can also go back down to the 2nd grade folder or go up to the 4th grade folder for more enrichment and review. I also am going to send a link to this fun activity, and this is a game that you could play with your family, and it's called almost like I have Who Has, and so we have all the different shapes with their different attributes, and then you can have riddles. It says my quadrilateral has 2 pairs of parallel sides, my quadrilateral has 4 congruent sides, and what figure am I? And so they could find that figure and match. So I'll send a link to this fun activity, and then there's tons of games online. This one happens to be a triangle shoot or splat game. If you want to focus just on the angle sizes, you can go here. If you want to focus on the lines, you can go here. And so when you click on the activity, you could either do it timed or simply relaxed, and the students can find, oh, I need to find an angle or something that has acute angles and get a point. Now I need a right angle. Now I need an obtuse angle. So I'm going to search, and I was wrong. There we go. So as we continue to go through, just search for games, but I think all of these resources, like I said, just definitely use them after this short week is over, before the Georgia Milestones Assessment. Also, don't forget about Triumph Online that has great activities, and we will try to assign something that goes well with this, as well as some of the fractions that we've been working on. So have a great time exploring geometry. It is lots of fun, but like I said, it is challenging with the vocabulary. And before I go, I do want to talk about this extended problem solving, so let me pull that activity up. This is also tons of fun, and you can find it in the resource section, and there's the answer key as well. But this is where we really want students to think and problem solve. This one is about a rug, and it talks about name the shapes that you see. The thing that's important for us to point out to students is that even though we obviously see triangles here, there is a rectangle. If we combine the triangles, we could have a rhombus. And think about, what if we put 3 triangles together? We would have a trapezoid. We could also build some rather large triangles by looking at 4 triangles together. So definitely think outside the box, and use the answer key as a guide if you get confused by the wording, so you know how to work with your child on these activities. Here is a fun, like, you can go back and say, well, how many rectangles did you see? How many rhombuses did you see? And then this one talks about really looking at shapes And I even had a difficult time really thinking about what are they looking for, and how are all these shapes the same, and how are all these shapes the same. And I will give you a clue. It had to do with a type, like with something about sides and how they're aligned. But again, you have the answer key to go over all of that. And there's questions, and just it's more about discussion and getting your students to really think about how all this goes together. And then it does have where you can print out dot paper, but you could use the online Geo boards as well. And it talks about making different shapes that follow certain rules and then labeling them. So you could do that online, you could do it on graph paper. Um, it doesn't matter as long as your child is able to create those shapes and explain their reasoning. So I hope this was beneficial, and have a great time exploring shapes.